The moment Dad says, "We spent your savings on someone better," without blinking, my world collapses completely. I stare at him in absolute shock, my voice barely a whisper as I ask, "Better than me?" That's when Grandpa jumps up from his worn leather chair, his 72-year-old frame still imposing, face hard as granite, and yells, "Name that someone right now." The tension in our living room becomes suffocating, thick enough to cut with a knife. $25,000 gone, vanished like smoke. 3 years of saving every single penny, working myself to exhaustion to buy back Mom's family farm, all of it stolen. Dad's new girlfriend, Brenda, sits smugly in Mom's old rocking chair, watching our family tear apart with obvious satisfaction. The farm deed burns in my pocket, ready for tomorrow's signing that will never happen now. Marcus, Brenda's 23-year-old son, needs legal defense money for his latest arrest, and Dad chose them over his own son's dreams. My name is Everett. I'm 28 years old, and until 5 minutes ago, I thought I knew my father. I thought I understood what family loyalty meant to him. I work double shifts at Miller's lumber mill 6 days a week, then spend every Sunday swinging a hammer on construction sites around Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Every muscle in my body aches constantly from the physical labor. My hands are permanently stained with sawdust and paint, but the pain never bothered me because I had a purpose that kept me going through the exhaustion. 2 years ago, cancer took my mother Sarah from us after an 18-month battle that drained our savings on treatments, promising hope but delivering only more medical bills. The expenses from specialists, experimental therapies, and hospital stays forced us to sell her family farm, 150 acres of rich Pennsylvania soil that had belonged to the Patterson family for 4 generations stretching back to 1873. Mom grew up in that white farmhouse with the wraparound porch and red shutters, learning to drive tractors before she could legally drive cars. She met Dad at a church social in the old red barn when she was 19, fell in love over shared dreams of raising children surrounded by apple orchards and cornfields. They got married in that same barn 3 years later, with flowers from her grandmother's garden decorating the altar. Standing beside her hospital bed during those final days, watching cancer steal her strength but never her spirit, I made a promise that would define the next 3 years of my life. "I'll get it back, Mom. I'll buy back your farm and make sure our family stays connected to the land that raised you." She squeezed my hand with what little strength she had left, her voice barely audible above the machines keeping her alive. "Make sure the apple orchard blooms again, Everett. Promise me you'll plant new trees where the old ones are dying. Your children should climb those branches like I did when I was little." Those were among her last words to me, spoken with the clarity that sometimes comes to people approaching death. She passed away 3 days later, and I kept that promise burning in my heart through the darkest period of grief our family had ever experienced. After the funeral, I learned that the new owners, an elderly couple named Harold and Margaret Henderson, understood the emotional value of the property to our family. They had bought it planning to retire there, but when they learned about our situation from Mom's obituary and the conversations at her funeral, they made an extraordinary offer. "If you can raise $25,000 for a down payment within 2 years, we'll sell the farm back to your family at fair market value," Mrs. Henderson told me at the cemetery after Mom's burial. "We know what this land means to the Patterson family, and we believe some things are more important than profit." They even held off 3 other potential buyers for 2 years while I saved every penny, turning down offers from developers who wanted to turn the property into a strip mall or housing development. I sacrificed everything for that farm, giving up any semblance of a normal life for a 28-year-old man. No vacations, no new vehicle even when my pickup truck broke down twice a month and left me stranded on back roads. No dating because dinner and movies cost money I couldn't spare. I ate beans and rice for dinner most nights, wore secondhand clothes from thrift stores, and turned down every invitation from friends because socializing meant spending money that belonged in my savings account. Every spare dollar from 70-hour work weeks went into the savings account Dad helped me set up at First National Bank. Since my credit was still recovering from some college loan troubles in my early 20s, Dad co-signed the account to help me get better interest rates and avoid monthly fees that would eat into my progress. Dad seemed genuinely proud of my dedication back then, before Brenda entered our lives like a poison slowly destroying everything healthy in our family. He would brag to his coworkers at the telephone company about how his boy was working himself to the bone to honor his mother's memory. That's real character. He'd tell anyone who would listen at church or the hardware store. Everett's bringing our family land back where it belongs. Just like Sarah always dreamed. She'd be so proud of that boy's determination. 6 months ago, everything changed when Dad started dating Brenda Walsh. She's a 45-year-old divorced woman with bleached blonde hair, too much makeup, and a laugh that sounds forced and artificial. But she made Dad smile for the first time since Mom's funeral, and I desperately wanted him to find happiness again after 2 years of watching him struggle with loneliness and depression. I welcomed her into our family dinners and holiday celebrations, trying to be the supportive son who wanted his father to heal from grief. But I started noticing troubling changes in Dad's behavior and spending habits that should have raised immediate red flags. Dad began buying expensive steaks instead of the ground beef we'd eaten since Mom's medical bills destroyed our budget. He purchased new clothes that cost more than my monthly grocery allowance, cologne that he'd never worn during 25 years of marriage, and jewelry for Brenda that sparkled brighter than anything he'd ever bought, Mom even on special anniversaries. When I questioned the spending during a family dinner where Brenda was showing off a new diamond bracelet, Dad became defensive in a way I'd never seen before. I've been grieving and sacrificing for 2 years. Everett, he snapped, his voice carrying an edge of resentment that shocked me. Don't I deserve a little happiness? Shouldn't I be allowed to enjoy life again instead of just existing in Sarah's shadow? The comment about Mom's shadow hurt deeply, but I tried to understand his perspective. Grief affects people differently, and maybe Dad needed to feel like he was living again, instead of just surviving each day. 3 weeks ago, Marcus got arrested for running some kind of investment scam targeting elderly people in nursing homes. Brenda showed up at our house in tears, mascara running down her cheeks, claiming her boy was innocent and framed by a dishonest business partner who was jealous of Marcus's success. He's a good kid who made one mistake trusting the wrong person, she sobbed in our kitchen while Dad held her and stroked her hair. The public defender won't care about Marcus's future. He needs a real lawyer, someone who'll fight for justice instead of just pushing him through the system. That's when Dad started talking constantly about family loyalty and the importance of helping people in need. Sometimes you have to step up for the people who matter, he'd say, looking directly at me when Brenda was around. Real family takes care of each other, especially when times get tough. Now, standing in our living room with Grandpa's eyes blazing and Brenda smirking like she's won some contest she's been playing for months, Dad drops the bomb that destroys 3 years of sacrifice and a lifetime of dreams. I withdrew the money 3 days ago and gave it to Brenda for Marcus's legal defense fund. Dad says without a trace of shame or recognition of what he's done. You can save more money, Everett. You're young and strong. But Marcus can't get those years back if he goes to prison. He's young. His whole life is ahead of him. You'll figure something else out. The farm closing is scheduled for tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. sharp. The Hendersons are flying to Florida next week to finalize their retirement plans and need to complete the sale before they leave. Without that down payment, they'll have no choice but to sell to the developers who've been circling the property like vultures for months, ready to turn Mom's apple orchard into a strip mall parking lot and her childhood home into a memory. Grandpa Walter steps forward with the measured pace of a man who spent 30 years as a police detective dealing with criminals and liars. His 72-year-old frame still carries the authority that made hardened felons confess their crimes, and his gray eyes focus on Brenda with an intensity that makes her confident smirk falter for the first time since I've known her. Donald, you need to hear this before you destroy your relationship with your son completely, Grandpa says in the calm voice that always preceded his most devastating revelations during my childhood when he'd catch me in elaborate lies. He reaches into his jacket pocket and pulls out a thick manila folder bulging with documents, photographs, and printed materials that obviously represent weeks of careful investigation. Brenda's transformation is immediate and telling. The grieving mother act disappears, replaced by the cold calculation of someone who's been caught but isn't ready to surrender yet. Walter, you have no right to investigate private citizens, she says. But her voice lacks the conviction it carried moments ago. I don't know what you think you've discovered, but shut your mouth and sit down, Grandpa snaps with the authority that made criminals twice his size comply with his orders. Brenda Martinez Walsh Thompson Rodriguez, depending on which state you're operating in and which identity suits your current con. He opens the folder methodically and spreads photographs, documents, and police reports across Mom's old coffee table like evidence in a criminal trial. Driver's licenses with different names and addresses, bank statements from multiple states, showing identical patterns of large deposits followed by immediate transfers, and police reports dating back 5 years, paint a picture of systematic criminal behavior. She's not just a con artist taking advantage of your loneliness, Grandpa continues, his voice carrying the deadly calm that preceded arrests during his law enforcement career. She's a specialist who targets recently widowed men through church groups, grief counseling sessions, senior dating websites, and community organizations where vulnerable people seek support. Dad's face goes pale as Grandpa points to specific documents with the precision of a prosecutor building a case. In Nebraska, she convinced Harold Mitchell, a 70-year-old Vietnam veteran, to give her $80,000 from his disability savings. She claimed Marcus needed emergency surgery for a brain tumor. The surgery never happened, and Harold lost his house. My hands shake as I examine printed emails between Brenda and Marcus with subject lines that make me physically sick. Lumber mill Mark financial update. Farm money extraction. Timeline. Mutter, and final score completion strategy. They've been planning this specific con for 4 months, Grandpa explains, spreading out more evidence like a detective presenting a case to a jury. They researched your finances through public records, Sarah's obituary information, social media posts about the farm purchase, and even your work schedule at the lumber mill. The emails reveal a level of calculation and cruelty that cuts deeper than any physical weapon could. Brenda wrote to Marcus, "The father is completely broken after losing his wife. Classic grief, vulnerability, pattern. Keep pushing the family loyalty angle and make him feel like choosing our crisis over his son's dream proves his commitment to our new family unit." Another message from Marcus to Brenda makes my stomach turn. "The farm money represents our biggest single score yet, $25,000 cash. And the old man is so desperate for female attention and validation, he'll sacrifice his own son's future to keep you happy. Play the helpless mother card harder, and he'll empty every account he has access to." Dad staggers backward like he's been physically struck by a heavyweight boxer, catching himself on the arm of Mom's old chair. "This can't be real. Brenda loves me. Brenda loves me. She told me I was the first man who ever truly understood her pain after her divorce. She said I made her feel safe and valued again." Grandpa's expression softens slightly with sympathy for his son's victimization, but his voice remains firm and unwavering. "That's exactly what she told Harold Mitchell in Nebraska and Margaret Simpson in Missouri and Robert Chen in Kansas and David Thompson in Ohio. Word for word, Donald. She has a script perfected through years of practice." I read more emails aloud, my voice cracking with each devastating revelation. Meeting with the son tomorrow to assess his emotional attachment to the farm project. He's completely obsessed with his dead mother's memory and the family property. Perfect leverage point for final manipulation. If the father chooses our fabricated crisis over his son's lifelong dream, we own him completely and can extract additional funds. Brenda stands up abruptly, grabbing her purse and car keys with movements that suggest she's preparing to flee before this confrontation escalates further. I don't have to listen to this paranoid nonsense from some bitter old man who can't stand seeing Donald happy and moving forward with his life. "Sit down immediately," Grandpa orders with such commanding authority that even I feel compelled to obey despite not being the target of his command. "Marcus isn't your son, is he, Brenda? He's your business partner, and probably your romantic partner as well. 31 years old, not 23, and you've been running these family emergency cons together since 2019. The room falls silent, except for the steady ticking of Mom's antique mantel clock, and the sound of Dad's increasingly labored breathing, as the full scope of his betrayal becomes clear. Brenda's mask finally slips completely, revealing the cold, predatory intelligence underneath the false warmth and maternal concern she's worn for months. Her voice loses all pretense of grief or vulnerability. "You can't prove any of these wild accusations," she says, but her defensive posture and nervous glances toward the door suggest she knows exactly how much evidence Grandpa has gathered. Grandpa smiles with the grim satisfaction of a detective who's built an airtight case against a dangerous criminal. I contacted FBI Special Agent Maria Santos 2 weeks ago. She's my former partner from the Philadelphia Police Department, now works financial crimes for the federal government. She's been tracking your multi-state operation for over 2 years, waiting for enough evidence to make arrests that will result in significant prison sentences. The implications hit me like a physical blow. This isn't just about our family's money or my farm dreams. Brenda and Marcus are part of a larger criminal enterprise that has destroyed multiple families across several states, leaving a trail of financial and emotional devastation in their wake. Dad collapses into his chair, head buried in his hands, shoulders shaking with the realization of what his loneliness and poor judgment have cost, not just our family, but potentially other innocent families as well. "Oh God, what have I done?" he whispers through his fingers. "Sarah, I'm so sorry. Everett, I'm so sorry. I've destroyed everything you worked for, everything your mother loved." But sorry doesn't restore $25,000 or resurrect the farm closing scheduled for tomorrow morning. Sorry doesn't erase the months of systematic manipulation and family destruction, or undo the emails showing how Brenda systematically turned my father against his own son while positioning herself and Marcus as the grateful, deserving family he should prioritize. The betrayal cuts in multiple directions simultaneously. Dad chose criminals over his child, breaking promises to his dead wife and living son. But seeing him manipulated and victimized by professionals who studied his vulnerabilities creates a confusing mix of anger and pity in my chest. He's both perpetrator and victim, and I don't know which emotion should dominate my response. While Dad sits broken in his chair and Brenda maintains her defiant stance near the door, Grandpa continues reading from his comprehensive investigation file. What he reveals next destroys any remaining hope I might have had for salvaging this situation or maintaining any illusion that this was simply one terrible mistake. The $25,000 from Everett's farm fund wasn't the first money you gave her, was it, Donald? Grandpa's voice carries the weight of terrible knowledge accumulated through weeks of careful detective work. Dad's prolonged silence confirms my worst fears even before he finds the courage to speak. When he finally looks up, tears stream down his face like he's physically bleeding from the emotional wounds he's inflicted on our family. "I just wanted to help someone who seemed grateful for my support," Dad whispers, his voice barely audible above the clock's ticking. "She said Marcus needed help with emergencies, and I thought I was being a good stepfather figure." "How much total?" I interrupt, dreading the answer but needing to understand the full scope of the financial devastation. "How much money have you given them over the months, Dad?" Dad's confession comes in pieces, each revelation hitting me like individual hammer blows to my chest. The car repairs last month when her transmission supposedly failed. $3,000 because she couldn't get to work without reliable transportation. Then her emergency room visit for chest pains that turned out to be anxiety. $5,000 because her insurance had allegedly lapsed and she couldn't afford the medical bills. My mind races to calculate the growing total while Dad continues his devastating admission, and Marcus's previous legal trouble in March when he was arrested for credit card fraud. $4,000 for bail money because Brenda couldn't bear the thought of her son sitting in jail. Each revelation represents another betrayal of the promises Dad made to Mom during her final days. We agreed to live simply and save money to honor her memory by preserving the family farm. Instead, he's been secretly funding the fake crises of criminals who researched our vulnerabilities and crafted manipulation strategies, specifically designed to exploit his grief. But Grandpa's expression tells me there's even more devastating information yet to be revealed. The investigation folder still contains documents he hasn't shown us. "What else, Donald?" Grandpa presses with the relentless patience of an experienced interrogator who knows when suspects are holding back crucial information. "What other money did you give them?" Dad breaks down completely, sobbing with the raw emotion of a man who finally understands the magnitude of his betrayal. "The life insurance money from Sarah's policy. $5,000 that was supposed to pay for her headstone and memorial garden. I gave it to Brenda when Marcus was arrested the first time in February." I stagger backward, catching myself against the wall as this revelation hits me like a physical attack. Mom's headstone still sits unfinished at Greenwood Cemetery because Dad claimed we couldn't afford the engraving and memorial garden installation. Every time I visit her grave to talk to her about my progress saving for the farm, I see that plain gray stone and feel guilty that we haven't honored her memory properly. And Sarah's jewelry collection, Dad continues, his voice breaking with shame. I sold her engagement ring, wedding band, pearl necklace, and emerald earrings at Peterson's pawn shop downtown. $8,000 total. The room spins around me as I process this ultimate violation of Mom's memory. Her engagement ring was a family heirloom passed down from Dad's grandmother through 3 generations. It was supposed to go to my future wife someday, continuing a tradition that stretched back to the 1890s. Mom wore those pearls to church every Sunday for 20 years, and the emerald earrings were Dad's anniversary gift to her after I was born. The retirement fund? Grandpa asks quietly, though his tone suggests he already knows the answer from his investigation. Borrowed $3,000 against my pension plan, Dad admits, and I sold Sarah's and my old Ford pickup truck last week for $4,000. Told Everett someone stole it from the lumber mill parking lot. The numbers burn themselves into my brain as I calculate the total financial devastation. $25,000 from my farm savings, $5,000 from Mom's life insurance meant for her memorial, $8,000 from her precious jewelry collection, $3,000 from vehicles that represented family transportation and work tools, $3,000 borrowed against Dad's retirement security, $48,000 in 8 months, all handed over to criminals who laughed at our family's grief and pain. But Grandpa reveals the cruelest detail as he shows us bank statements and transaction records from Brenda's accounts. She deposited every dollar you gave her, Donald, and immediately transferred most of it to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. The legal defense fund for Marcus doesn't exist. He's sitting in county lockup with a public defender, exactly where he was when this entire manipulation began. The evidence is overwhelming and heartbreaking. Screenshots of Brenda's online banking show deposits matching exactly with the amounts Dad gave her, followed within hours by wire transfers to international accounts, beyond the reach of American law enforcement. She never intended to help Marcus or anyone else. Every dollar was immediately moved out of the country as part of a systematic money laundering operation. Brenda finally speaks again, but her voice now carries none of the warmth or vulnerability she's performed for months. The mask of the grieving mother and grateful girlfriend has been completely removed, revealing the cold predator underneath. You people are absolutely pathetic, she says with casual cruelty that takes my breath away. A dead woman who should have been forgotten years ago, a farm that should have been sold to developers, and an old man who thinks playing amateur detective matters. Donald gave me that money willingly because he wanted to be part of a real family instead of wallowing in grief with you pathetic losers. The calculated cruelty of her words breaks something fundamental inside Dad. He's been carrying guilt about moving on after Mom's death, wondering if focusing on her memory was preventing him from embracing new happiness. Brenda exploited that vulnerability perfectly, making him feel like choosing her proved his emotional health and growth, while choosing his son and dead wife's memory meant staying trapped in the past. My phone rings with a call I've been anticipating all day but now dread answering. The caller ID shows Henderson, the current owner of Mom's family farm. Everett, I hate to bother you the night before our closing, but I wanted to confirm the wire transfer details for tomorrow morning's transaction. You still have our bank routing numbers and account information, right? I look around the room at the evidence of systematic financial devastation scattered across Mom's coffee table like the remnants of our destroyed family trust. Mr. Henderson, I need to ask about the possibility of extending our deadline. Something completely unexpected has come up with the financing. The pause on the other end stretches too long, filled with the kind of silence that carries bad news. Son, I'm truly sorry, but we're flying to Florida tomorrow afternoon to finalize our retirement arrangements. We've already coordinated with our bank, the title company, and our real estate attorney. If we can't complete the closing tomorrow morning, we'll have no choice but to accept the developer's cash offer. They're prepared to sign papers immediately and begin demolition by next month. The call ends, and with it, any hope of saving Mom's farm from destruction. 4 generations of family history will become a strip mall because Dad chose criminals over his own son's dreams and his dead wife's memory. The apple orchard where Mom learned to climb trees will be a parking lot by Christmas, and the farmhouse where she grew up will be demolished to make room for a shopping center. Brenda heads for the door, clearly planning to disappear before law enforcement arrives. Her confident stride suggests She's done this before. Abandoned other victims after extracting maximum financial damage. This has been entertaining, boys. But I have places to be and people to meet, she says, with casual dismissal. Donald, thanks for all the generous donations to our cause. Don't bother calling me. That's when Grandpa reveals the final piece of his carefully planned investigation, the detail that transforms this confrontation from family tragedy into criminal justice. Grandpa reaches into his jacket with deliberate precision and pulls out a small recording device, no bigger than a matchbook, with a red light indicating it has been running throughout this entire confrontation. Everything you've said tonight has been recorded, Brenda. He announces with the calm satisfaction of a detective who's built an airtight case, including your detailed confession about manipulating Donald, your admission about transferring money to offshore accounts, and your acknowledgement that the legal defense fund was fabricated. Brenda's confident demeanor evaporates instantly, replaced by the desperate calculation of a cornered predator. You can't record people without their consent. That's illegal wiretapping, and anything you captured is inadmissible in court. Pennsylvania is a one-party consent state for recording conversations. Grandpa responds with the confidence of someone who spent 3 decades ensuring his arrests resulted in convictions. I'm a party to this conversation. I consented to recording it, and everything you've said is perfectly admissible evidence in both state and federal court. Brenda's face goes white with a mixture of rage and fear as she realizes the legal trap she's walked into. But Grandpa's real surprise comes when he pulls out his cell phone and dials a number from memory with the familiarity of someone who's made this call many times before. Maria, it's Walter. Our subject is here, and she just provided a complete confession on tape. Yes, everything we discussed is confirmed. Bring the full team immediately. He hangs up and addresses the room with the authority of someone taking control of a crime scene. FBI Special Agent Maria Santos and her Financial Crimes Task Force are 5 minutes away. They've been monitoring this situation and waiting for exactly the kind of evidence you just provided. But Grandpa's biggest revelation comes next, transforming this moment from justice delayed to justice actively pursued. Everett, I've been liquidating my retirement investments and savings accounts for the past 6 weeks. I have $30,000 in certified bank funds ready for immediate transfer to complete the farm purchase. The room falls silent except for Dad's continued sobbing as Grandpa continues explaining his contingency planning. I hoped Donald would recognize Brenda's manipulation and choose his family before it was too late. But I wasn't going to let 4 generations of Patterson family history be destroyed because my son was victimized by professional criminals. Car doors slam outside our house, followed by the authoritative voices and radio chatter that indicate federal law enforcement has arrived. Grandpa opens our front door to reveal FBI Special Agent Maria Santos, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, wearing a federal windbreaker, accompanied by 2 local police officers and a federal marshal carrying arrest warrants. Walter, good to see you again. Agent Santos nods to Grandpa with the familiarity of former law enforcement partners before turning to survey the room with professional assessment. Miss Martinez, Walsh Thompson, I presume? We've been looking forward to this conversation for quite some time. Brenda makes one final attempt to maintain her innocence, but her voice lacks any conviction. I want a lawyer immediately. You people are harassing an innocent woman based on the paranoid fantasies of a bitter old man. You're under arrest on federal charges including wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy to commit elder abuse, and operating a criminal enterprise across state lines. Agent Santos announces while producing handcuffs with practiced efficiency. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. As the Miranda rights are read with bureaucratic precision, Agent Santos explains the scope of their investigation to me and Dad. We've been tracking this criminal operation for 20 months across 12 states and 47 documented victims. Your family's case provided the breakthrough evidence we needed to freeze their financial accounts and trace money transfers going back 4 years. The evidence they've gathered is staggering in its scope and detail. Brenda's cell phone contains hundreds of text messages to Marcus about timing this final scam, photographs of Dad's financial documents taken secretly during her visits to our house, and ongoing communications with other potential victims in different states who are being set up for similar cons. Her laptop computer reveals the true sophistication of their operation. Spreadsheets tracking multiple targets organized by asset value and emotional vulnerability scores, detailed profiles of grieving widowers, with information about their financial resources and psychological weaknesses, and templates for manipulation strategies proven effective with different personality types. Dad watches in complete horror as the woman he thought loved him is handcuffed and led toward the police car. Even as the metal restraints click into place, Brenda shows no remorse or regret, only fury at being caught and frustrated anger that her carefully planned operation has been disrupted. "You're a pathetic fool, Donald," she calls out as officers guide her toward the patrol car. "I never loved you for 1 second. You were just a lonely old man with access to money that wasn't even yours. Marcus and I have been laughing about your stupidity for months." The calculated cruelty of her final words completes Dad's devastation. Every intimate conversation they shared, every declaration of love and commitment, every family dinner where she played the grateful girlfriend role, was pure performance designed to extract maximum financial damage. She researched Mom's death thoroughly, studied our family's emotional vulnerabilities, and crafted a manipulation strategy specifically designed to exploit a grieving widower's desperate need for companionship and purpose. Agent Santos shows us preliminary asset recovery information displayed on her tablet computer. Federal agents have frozen accounts in 6 states containing approximately $90,000 in liquid assets. Much of what was stolen has already been transferred to international accounts, but we're coordinating with foreign law enforcement agencies on recovery efforts. The process takes considerable time, but we're optimistic about recovering significant portions of the stolen funds for victim restitution. She turns to Dad with a mixture of professional sympathy and serious legal responsibility. "Mr. Patterson, you are clearly a victim in this case, but you're also our most critical witness for prosecuting the entire criminal network. Your detailed testimony will be essential for helping other families recover their stolen money and preventing future victims." The legal process begins immediately with forms, statements, and evidence collection that will continue for months. Dad will need to provide comprehensive testimony about every conversation with Brenda, every manipulation tactic she employed, and every financial transaction that transferred our family's money to criminal accounts. Meanwhile, my phone rings again with a call that changes everything about this nightmare situation. It's Mr. Henderson calling back with news that restores hope to what seemed like a completely hopeless situation. "Everett, my wife and I just finished reading the preliminary newspaper article about your family's situation in tomorrow morning's Lancaster County Herald. The reporter interviewed us about the farm sale and explained what those criminals did to your savings. We've talked it over extensively, and we're making 2 important decisions." I hold my breath, afraid to hope for good news after so much devastation. First, we're extending the closing deadline by 60 days to give you time to arrange alternative financing. Second, we're reducing the down payment requirement from $25,000 to $20,000. Your mother's memory and your dedication to preserving family agricultural heritage deserve better than what happened to you tonight. I look at Grandpa, whose determined expression shows he's already calculating financial arrangements. The farm can still be saved despite the criminal betrayal. 4 generations of family history can be preserved, despite the systematic destruction criminals attempted to inflict on our legacy. But the emotional cost of rebuilding trust between father and son will take much longer than 60 days to heal completely. 6 weeks after Brenda's arrest, Agent Santos calls us to the FBI field office in downtown Philadelphia for a comprehensive briefing that reveals the true scope of the criminal enterprise our family helped expose and destroy. The federal building conference room walls are covered with photographs, detailed financial charts, maps showing criminal activity across multiple states, and timeline displays that make the investigation look like a major organized crime prosecution. Agent Santos and her team have been working 12-hour days to unravel what they're now calling Operation Family Values, the systematic targeting of grieving families across the American Midwest and Eastern Seaboard. The forensic analysis of Brenda and Marcus's electronic devices, combined with financial records and victim statements, has revealed a sophisticated criminal network that's been operating for 5 years. Agent Santos begins, gesturing to a massive timeline spanning the entire wall. 12 states, 47 documented victims, and total confirmed losses exceeding $400,000. Each victim's story displayed on the wall breaks my heart and reinforces how lucky our family was to have Grandpa's intervention. Harold Mitchell, a 70-year-old Vietnam veteran from Omaha, lost his entire $80,000 disability savings when Brenda convinced him that Marcus needed emergency surgery for a supposedly life-threatening brain tumor. The surgery was completely fabricated, and Harold had to sell his house and move in with his daughter's family because Brenda left him completely financially destroyed. Margaret Simpson, a recently retired teacher from Kansas City, lost $60,000 from her carefully managed pension fund when Marcus allegedly needed bail money for a drunk driving arrest that resulted in someone's death. She now works part-time at a grocery store at age 68 because she can no longer afford the retirement she'd planned for decades. The most heartbreaking case involved a widowed father in Denver whose 18-year-old daughter had died in a car accident caused by a drunk driver. Brenda posed as a grief counselor specializing in sudden loss trauma and convinced him to honor his daughter's memory by helping another young person avoid prison and turn his life around. She stole $40,000 from his daughter's college fund, money he'd been saving to establish a scholarship in her name at the local community college. They perfected their emotional manipulation approach through systematic trial and error. Agent Santos explains while showing us printed communications between Brenda and Marcus. They identified specific psychological triggers that work most effectively on grieving men: unresolved parental instincts, guilt about moving on after spousal loss, and desperate desire to be needed by someone who expresses genuine gratitude for their sacrifices. Dad sits beside me throughout the briefing, visibly aging as he hears how completely and professionally he was manipulated. The federal investigation revealed that Brenda spent 4 months researching our family before making any contact with Dad. She knew Mom's complete medical history, our financial struggles during her cancer treatment, the farm's emotional significance to our family heritage, and even specific details about my work schedule and personal relationships. Marcus's role extended far beyond simply playing the troubled son needing financial help. Federal analysis of their communications shows he was the technical expert responsible for setting up false identities, managing complex offshore banking arrangements, and researching potential targets through social media surveillance and public records investigation. They weren't small-time con artists looking for quick scores, Agent Santos continues. This was a sophisticated criminal enterprise with long-term planning, international money laundering capabilities, and systematic victim selection based on comprehensive psychological profiling. The investigation also uncovered evidence of their planned future victims, targets that would have represented much larger financial scores than our family provided. A recently widowed rancher in Texas owned land worth over $2 million. A bereaved father in California whose technology company stock options could have provided a massive payday. They weren't planning to retire after stealing our farm money. They were building toward increasingly ambitious criminal operations. But Dad's detailed testimony and Grandpa's recorded evidence provided the breakthrough that federal prosecutors needed to build an airtight case. The combination of financial records, victim statements, recorded confessions, and electronic communications created a prosecution package that defense attorneys couldn't effectively challenge. Your father's willingness to testify about specific manipulation tactics has been essential for understanding their methods, Agent Santos tells me during a briefing break. His cooperation will help us convict the entire network and develop better protection strategies for other vulnerable families. The personal cost to Dad has been enormous and very public. Local news coverage of the arrest and subsequent investigation made him a recognizable figure in Lancaster County, with coworkers, church members, and community neighbors learning intimate details about his poor judgment and the betrayal of his own son. His employer at the telephone company required him to undergo comprehensive financial counseling to ensure his personal problems wouldn't affect his access to customer account information or company financial systems. Some of Brenda's other victims have even considered filing civil lawsuits against Dad, claiming that information he provided about our family's situation helped Brenda and Marcus refine their manipulation techniques for targeting subsequent families. The legal liability issues remain unresolved, but the emotional burden weighs heavily on Dad's conscience. However, the federal asset recovery process has begun producing encouraging results for victim restitution. Agents froze accounts in multiple states, and recovered over $120,000 in immediately liquid assets. While much money was successfully transferred to offshore accounts that may prove impossible to recover, the initial seizures provide hope for meaningful restitution to families whose lives were destroyed by systematic fraud. The most unexpected development comes from extensive media coverage of our case and the community response it generated. The Henderson family's decision to extend our deadline and reduce the down payment requirements was only the beginning of local support for preserving Mom's farm. Mrs. Henderson called me personally to share memories of Mom from their overlapping involvement in church social organizations and community agricultural committees. Your mother talked constantly about her dreams for that farm and her hopes that future generations of Patterson family members would preserve its agricultural character, Mrs. Henderson told me during our conversation. She would be absolutely heartbroken to see it become a shopping center. We're not just selling you property, we're helping preserve her legacy and your family's agricultural heritage. Community support has emerged from unexpected sources throughout Lancaster County. Local business owners who knew Mom have offered work opportunities, equipment loans, and financial assistance for starting farm operations. The lumber mill promoted me to shift supervisor with a substantial pay increase, partly in recognition of my strong work ethic, but also acknowledging the injustice my family endured. Mom's old church started a memorial fund to help complete her headstone and establish the memorial garden she always wanted on the farm property. The fund has raised over $8,000 from community donations, enough to create a beautiful remembrance space and plant the fruit trees she dreamed about. But the most significant personal change involves Dad's gradual recognition of his failures and his genuine commitment to making substantial amends. He's begun intensive individual therapy to address his unresolved grief issues and the poor judgment that made him vulnerable to professional manipulation. I thought moving on from Sarah's death meant finding someone new to love, Dad explained during one of our first completely honest conversations since the arrest. I didn't understand that truly honoring her memory meant protecting what she cared about most in this world, our family relationships and the preservation of her agricultural heritage. The federal investigation continues expanding as prosecutors build cases against other members of what appears to be a larger criminal network. Brenda and Marcus were apparently part of an organization that specialized in different types of fraud, targeting various vulnerable populations across multiple regions. Their arrests led to discoveries of similar criminal operations in other areas of the country, suggesting that systematic fraud against grieving families represents a much larger problem than law enforcement agencies previously understood. Dad's testimony has become essential, not just for prosecuting our specific case, but for educating federal law enforcement about manipulation tactics used against bereaved families nationwide. He's worked directly with prosecutors in 5 states, helping them understand how professional criminals identify and exploit the emotional vulnerabilities that follow major family losses. 8 months after that devastating night when our family nearly destroyed itself in our living room, I stand outside the imposing federal courthouse in Philadelphia, watching Dad prepare to give testimony that will completely destroy Brenda and Marcus's legal defense. He's lost 20 pounds from stress and worry, gained substantial gray hair that makes him look older than his 53 years. But there's something fundamentally different in his posture today, a determination and moral clarity I haven't seen since Mom's funeral. Are you ready to face them again? I ask, as we walk up the courthouse steps together, passing through security checkpoints and metal detectors. I have to be ready, Dad replies with quiet intensity. It's the only way to make things right with you, with Sarah's memory, and with all the other families they destroyed. The federal courtroom is packed beyond capacity with victims from multiple states, FBI agents and federal prosecutors, defense attorneys, and media representatives covering what has become the largest elder fraud prosecution in Pennsylvania's history. Brenda sits at the defense table wearing an orange prison jumpsuit, no longer the charming woman who manipulated our family dinners and holiday celebrations. Marcus beside her appears younger and more vulnerable than the confident criminal who posed as a grateful stepson needing help. When Dad takes the witness stand, his voice carries steady conviction that fills the courtroom. For over 4 hours, he provides detailed testimony about every conversation, every manipulation technique, and every financial transaction that allowed professional criminals to systematically destroy our family's trust and financial security. She researched my wife's death thoroughly and knew exactly which emotional triggers would be most effective, Dad testifies with clinical precision. Brenda made me feel guilty about focusing on Sarah's memory and my son's dreams, instead of embracing new happiness with someone who seemed grateful for my support. Every time I hesitated about giving her money, she would mention how proud she was to be part of a family where people took care of each other. The federal prosecution presents recorded conversations where Brenda coached Marcus on specific techniques for playing the helpless son role more effectively. They show detailed emails discussing how to make Dad feel like choosing their fabricated crisis over his own son's legitimate needs would prove his commitment to their relationship and his emotional growth beyond grief. Dad's testimony becomes even more powerful when he describes the moment he finally understood the scope of their criminal operation. When Agent Santos showed me evidence of their systematic targeting of other grieving families, I realized that every intimate conversation Brenda and I shared was carefully scripted. She never loved me or cared about my healing. She was performing a role specifically designed to steal money from a lonely widower. The defense attorneys attempt to portray Dad as a willing participant who knew he was breaking sacred promises to his family. Their strategy involves suggesting that Dad's financial gifts were conscious choices rather than the result of professional manipulation. But Dad's responses completely destroy that defense approach. I was emotionally vulnerable and made terrible decisions that I'll regret for the rest of my life, Dad admits during aggressive cross-examination. But I genuinely believed I was helping someone I loved, and someone who loved me in return. When you're grieving and desperate for companionship, you want to believe that someone appreciates your sacrifices and values your support. They exploited that desperation, deliberately and systematically. During the lunch recess, Dad surprises me with news that fundamentally changes our relationship and his entire future. I've been working secretly with a financial advisor for the past 4 months, he says, pulling out legal documents that represent months of careful planning. I'm selling our family house, liquidating my entire retirement fund despite the tax penalties, and converting every asset I own into cash. The paperwork shows he's been methodically arranging to sell everything he possesses. The house where I grew up and where he shared 25 years of marriage with Mom, all his pension and retirement investments, his vehicles, and even personal belongings with any significant resale value. The comprehensive liquidation will generate enough money to repay me completely and contribute substantially to a victim compensation fund for other families. Dad, you can't sacrifice everything, I protest, genuinely concerned about his future security. Where will you live? How will you survive financially when you're ready to retire? I broke sacred promises I made to your mother on her deathbed, and I destroyed my relationship with my only child for criminals who laughed at our family's pain. Dad replies with unwavering determination. I can't undo that betrayal or erase the damage I caused. But I can ensure you achieve your dreams and that other families receive help recovering from similar devastation. The afternoon legal proceedings conclude with devastating efficiency for the defense. Faced with overwhelming evidence, including financial records, recorded confessions, detailed victim testimony, and comprehensive electronic communications, Marcus decides to accept a plea agreement rather than risk a much longer sentence after trial. The prosecution's case against Brenda proves so comprehensive and damaging that her defense attorney strongly advises accepting a negotiated plea deal rather than facing a jury trial that would likely result in maximum sentences. Judge Richardson's sentencing decision reflects the severity of their crimes and their impact on innocent families. Brenda receives 12 years in federal prison plus comprehensive restitution orders. Marcus gets 7 years with strict supervised release, requiring ongoing financial monitoring and complete transparency about all income and financial relationships. Both defendants face immediate deportation proceedings upon completion of their sentences due to immigration violations discovered during the investigation. They're permanently banned from internet access except under strict legal supervision and prohibited from any financial services, employment, or volunteer work with vulnerable populations. The most emotionally satisfying moment comes when Judge Richardson addresses them directly during the sentencing hearing. You didn't simply steal money from these families, Judge Richardson states with evident anger and moral clarity. You perverted sacred relationships between parents and children, exploited the natural grief that follows family loss, and transformed human compassion into a weapon against innocent people. The damage you've caused extends far beyond financial loss into the destruction of trust between family members and the violation of society's most fundamental values. The Victim Compensation Fund that Dad helped establish and promote has raised over $70,000 from community donations, recovered criminal assets, and contributions from local businesses and organizations. Several families will receive meaningful restitution that helps them rebuild their financial security after systematic destruction. As we leave the courthouse together, Dad's phone rings with final news from our real estate agent. The house has sold for more than the anticipated price, and combined with his retirement fund liquidation, he'll be able to repay me over $70,000. That's significantly more than the original farm down payment, and enough to provide substantial capital for starting comprehensive agricultural operations. I'm moving in with Grandpa on a long-term basis, Dad tells me, as we drive home through Lancaster County farmland. I need to rebuild my entire life from nothing, and that's exactly what I deserve after the damage I caused to our family. Independence isn't something I've earned at this point. Our conversation during the drive home becomes the most honest and emotionally raw discussion we've shared since Mom's death. Dad admits that losing her broke something fundamental inside him that he tried to repair by finding someone else to love, instead of learning to live with grief as a permanent part of honoring her memory. Therapy has taught me that moving forward from loss doesn't mean forgetting the past or replacing what you've lost, Dad explains with hard-earned wisdom. Sarah's love should have made me a better father and a more protective guardian of our family legacy, not a desperate man seeking validation from strangers who pretended to care about our well-being. That evening, I drive to Mom's farm for the official closing ceremony that was delayed by 8 months of criminal prosecution and family healing. Standing in the same fields where she played as a child and dreamed of raising grandchildren, I feel her spiritual presence and know she would be proud of the sacrifices her family ultimately made to preserve this agricultural heritage. Grandpa and Dad join me for the final paperwork signing, representing 3 generations of Patterson men united again in protecting what Mom loved most in the world. The legal documents that transfer ownership back to our family feel like a restoration of natural order after months of chaos and betrayal. The community healing process has accelerated significantly since the trial concluded. Dad has become a regular speaker at fraud prevention seminars and support groups for crime victims. His detailed knowledge of manipulation tactics makes him an effective educator for helping other vulnerable adults recognize and resist similar schemes. His story has been featured in law enforcement training materials used by federal agencies in multiple states. The case study helps investigators understand how professional criminals research and exploit the psychological vulnerabilities that follow major family losses. But the most important restoration happens quietly, in small moments between father and son, learning to trust each other again, after betrayal nearly destroyed our relationship permanently. 2 years after that terrible night when our family nearly destroyed itself forever, I wake up in the same bedroom where my mother grew up 7 decades ago, morning sunlight streaming through windows that have witnessed 4 generations of Patterson family history. Spring has arrived on our restored farm, with an explosion of new life that would fill Mom's heart with joy. Endless rows of organic vegetables stretching toward the horizon, the historic apple orchard heavy with white and pink blossoms, and the constant sounds of renewal and growth everywhere. The financial transformation has exceeded every hope I held during those dark months of uncertainty. Between recovered assets from Brenda's federal prosecution, Dad's sacrificial liquidation of everything he owned, and Grandpa's generous retirement contributions, I not only bought back Mom's beloved farm but established Patterson Family Organic Farm as a thriving, sustainable agricultural business that honors both family tradition and modern environmental stewardship. Local restaurants throughout Lancaster County compete for contracts to purchase my heirloom tomatoes, heritage corn varieties, and pesticide-free vegetables that carry the authentic flavors Mom remembered from her childhood. The produce brings premium prices because customers know they're buying food grown with the same traditional methods and environmental care that sustained this land for generations. The farmhouse restoration required 14 months of meticulous work, but every detail was planned to respect historical authenticity while incorporating modern efficiency and comfort. Mom's old bedroom became my home office where I manage crop planning and business operations. The kitchen, where she learned to cook from her grandmother, now serves meals prepared with ingredients grown in our own soil. The living room, where 3 generations nearly destroyed each other, has become a gathering place for Sunday dinners that celebrate family healing and agricultural heritage. Dad's personal transformation represents the most surprising and meaningful aspect of our family's recovery journey. After selling everything he owned and moving in with Grandpa, he discovered that physical labor on the farm provided more effective therapy than any counseling session ever could. Working the same fields where Mom played as a child helped him process his grief in healthy ways, rather than attempting to replace her memory with false relationships. I understand now what Sarah meant when she talked about being connected to the land. Dad tells me as we repair fence posts along the property boundary on a crisp October morning. She wasn't just being nostalgic about her childhood experiences. This place represents continuity between past and future, family values transmitted through generations, and the kind of authentic relationships that can't be manufactured or manipulated. Grandpa divides his time between his house in town and the guest suite I built in the renovated farmhouse, creating a multi-generational living arrangement that has strengthened our family bonds tremendously. Having 3 generations work together daily has restored the natural mentoring relationships that were disrupted by grief and poor judgment. Grandpa's agricultural wisdom guides major decisions about crop rotation, soil management, and sustainable farming practices that honor the land's history while ensuring its productivity for future generations. His stories about family heritage help preserve knowledge and traditions that were almost lost during the chaos that followed Mom's death. Dad's advocacy work has expanded far beyond our local community into a nationally recognized expertise about elder fraud prevention. His comprehensive understanding of manipulation tactics has made him a valuable consultant for federal law enforcement agencies, developing educational programs for vulnerable populations. Helping other families recognize and avoid the devastation we experienced gives real meaning to the terrible mistakes I made. Dad explains after returning from a conference in Washington, where he briefed congressional staff about financial fraud targeting bereaved families. I can't undo the betrayal and poor judgment that nearly destroyed our family, but I can prevent other families from suffering similar devastation. His testimony has contributed to stronger federal legislation protecting vulnerable adults from financial exploitation, mandatory cooling-off periods for large financial gifts, and better educational resources for seniors about common manipulation strategies used by professional criminals. The romantic development in my life evolved naturally through the agricultural community connections I've built over the past 2 years. Amanda teaches elementary school and volunteers at the Lancaster County Farmers Market, where I've been selling produce every Saturday morning. She loves hearing detailed stories about Mom's childhood on the farm and genuinely understands that preserving this agricultural heritage represents much more than a business opportunity. Amanda appreciates that honoring the past while building toward the future requires balancing tradition with innovation, exactly the perspective Mom would have wanted in a daughter-in-law. She helps tend the memorial garden we planted using seeds from flowers Mom grew decades ago, creating living connections between her memory and our continuing family story. Dad and Grandpa both thoroughly approve of Amanda's authenticity, kindness, and genuine respect for our family's agricultural heritage. She represents hope for the next generation while honoring the sacrifices previous generations made to preserve what they loved most. The legal closure arrived 18 months ago when Brenda completed her final court-ordered restitution payment. She's currently serving her sentence in a federal facility and will be deported immediately upon release to face criminal charges in her country of origin. Marcus was released early for good behavior but remains under lifetime financial monitoring with strict internet access restrictions that prevent any possibility of future fraud schemes. Both criminals remain permanently banned from social media platforms and must report all income, financial relationships, and living arrangements to federal authorities. The comprehensive monitoring system makes it virtually impossible for them to resume their criminal activities against vulnerable families. The community impact of Dad's educational work continues expanding throughout Pennsylvania and neighboring states. Prosecutor offices in 15 states have incorporated evidence and insights from our case into their fraud prevention programs. The Victim Compensation Fund has helped restore financial security to 12 families whose lives were systematically destroyed by similar criminal operations. Dad's speaking engagements at senior centers, churches, and community organizations have documented success in preventing numerous fraud attempts by teaching vulnerable adults to recognize manipulation tactics before financial damage occurs. But the most meaningful restoration happened 6 months ago, on the third anniversary of Mom's death, when our family visited her grave together for the first time since that night when criminal betrayal nearly destroyed us completely. The memorial garden beside her grave now blooms magnificently with flowers grown from seeds she planted years before her illness, creating a beautiful living connection between her memory and our continuing love for her. The completed headstone carries an inscription that perfectly captures her essence. Sarah Elizabeth Patterson, beloved wife, mother, and daughter of the soil. Her legacy lives on in the land she loved and the family she nurtured with unconditional devotion. Dad placed fresh flowers from the farm on her grave and spoke words that completed his long journey back to being the husband and father she always believed he could be. Sarah, I'm sorry it took me so long to understand what you meant about family worthiness and keeping sacred promises. Real worth isn't about impressing strangers or proving you've successfully moved beyond grief. It's about protecting what you loved most and honoring the values you tried to teach our family. Grandpa shared a story about how incredibly proud Mom would be of both Dad's courage to make complete amends for his mistakes and my determination to preserve family agricultural heritage despite seemingly impossible obstacles and devastating betrayal. Sarah always believed this farm would test our family's character in ways we couldn't anticipate, Grandpa reflected while looking across the fields she loved. We came very close to failing that test completely, but we passed it in the end by choosing family loyalty over convenience and authentic relationships over artificial ones. Standing in fields that represent 4 generations of family history and agricultural heritage, I reflected deeply on the incredible journey from that devastating night when Dad chose criminals over his own son's dreams to this moment of complete restoration and genuine hope for the future. The farm that nearly became a shopping center parking lot is now thriving agricultural land that will pass to future generations of Patterson children, who will learn the same values from this soil that shaped Mom's character. The family relationships that almost disintegrated permanently have been rebuilt on stronger foundations of honesty, accountability, and shared commitment to honoring her legacy through our daily choices and long-term planning. The life lesson that emerged from our darkest period is absolutely clear. True worthiness isn't measured by money, social status, or the approval of people who don't genuinely care about your well-being. Real worth is demonstrated through keeping sacred promises to people you love, protecting family legacy from those who would destroy it for personal gain, and having the moral courage to fight for what matters most even when the cost seems impossible to pay. Mom's cherished dream of watching grandchildren play in these same fields where she grew up is becoming reality as Amanda and I plan our wedding for next spring in the restored barn, where Mom's parents were married 8 decades ago. We talk regularly about raising children who will understand that this land represents much more than agricultural property. It's a living testament to the power of family loyalty and the critical importance of honoring the sacrifices previous generations made to preserve what they loved most deeply. As I conclude this story while sitting in the same kitchen where Mom learned to cook from her grandmother, I can almost hear her voice carried on the evening breeze through the apple orchard she loved so much. Make sure those apple trees bloom again, Everett, she whispered during her final days. Mission accomplished completely, Mom. They're blooming more beautifully than ever before. What would you do if someone you trusted completely betrayed your deepest dreams and most sacred family promises for criminals who openly laughed at your pain and suffering? Have you ever faced the difficult choice between forgiveness and justice when someone you love makes devastating mistakes that nearly destroy everything you've worked to build? How do you balance holding people accountable for their choices while still offering them opportunities for genuine redemption and restoration? Thank you for joining me on this emotional journey through one of the most difficult and transformative periods of my entire life. If this story touched your heart, taught you something valuable about family loyalty and the power of redemption, or inspired you to protect your own family's legacy from those who might exploit your trust, please hit that like button to support more real stories about overcoming betrayal and rebuilding relationships. Subscribe to hear more authentic accounts of families who survived devastating challenges and emerge stronger through their commitment to authentic love and mutual support. Share this story with anyone who needs to understand that families can survive even the deepest wounds and most painful betrayals when people have the moral courage to acknowledge their mistakes and make complete amends. Remember always that true worthiness comes from keeping promises to people you love even when they're no longer here to hold you accountable. protecting what matters most from those who would destroy it for temporary personal gain, and never giving up on family legacy, even when others choose to abandon their responsibilities for immediate gratification. Until next time, may your own family bonds grow stronger and more resilient through both joyful celebrations and difficult challenges that test your commitment to each other.